All right, let's do this.
Let's chat.
Okay, so one of the biggest questions that I get asked, and I'm sure you get asked all the time about the Unity IEMs, is how many drivers are in them? And I mean, the answer is 4, but I often want to draw that answer out a little bit because, in my opinion, the driver count game is a better marketing tool than it is an actual way to make in-ear monitors sound better. And I'm just curious what your thoughts are on that.
Yeah, that's a great question. When I started out with Plunge Audio, before you joined, that was the whole game, was how many drivers you could get into a pair of custom monitors. And everybody was doing it, and I thought that's what you had to do to get the sound quality. I started out with dual and triple drivers and from Knowles, and they were like pre-built, and I just attached a positive and negative lead and went, oh, this is what they sound like. And so I spent a lot of time trying to figure out how to make them sound like me rather than, sort of a predetermined product. And so I used to take, the Knowles had this triple driver thing, which sounded great. There was nothing wrong with it. But I pulled cut the tweeter off because it was glued to the sub, and then I'd pull all the leads off the tweeter and go, well, there's 2 drivers here. Could I use 2 tweeters and make them sound different? Use a dual tweeter. And then I had a great conversation with a guy at Sony, and I was new. I didn't really even know how to create a crossover. If I'm honest, I didn't really know. I was like, how do you do it? And I developed a relationship with him, and he gave me some pointers. And then at one point, he said to me on the phone, because I was looking for a tweeter, and he said, I have this tweeter, and nobody wants it. It sounds like a Dr. Seuss thing. Nobody wants this tweeter. He's like, it's the best sounding tweeter that we have. I love it. The tonality and the quality of it is great. And he's like, but nobody wants it because it's a single tweeter. And that was like an eye-opening moment for me of like, why doesn't anybody want it? If it sounds great, why don't people want it? He's like, because people all the companies had to have at least dual or quad drivers.
Yeah.
It's like, so nobody buys this driver because it's a single. It's our best sounding driver. So it was at that moment, within about 3 years of starting Plunge Audio, that I decided I wanted the best sounding driver. I'm like, that's the one I want. If that's a single and it's the best sounding, that's the one I want. And he's like, great, let's do it. And that single tweeter became my staple tweeter for easily 10 years. All the producer model, just about every model had that tweeter in it. And it was from that little conversation with my friend at Sony, and that I had decided that I wanted the best sounding drivers, not the number of drivers, the best sounding. Now, that being said, building customs for 14 or 15 years, I did get into other drivers and going, well, what does this do and what does that do? And I built lots of 9 drivers per side sort of thing. It was a demand in the thing. But I found over the course of this whole thing, and as you will attest to, that the more I started eliminating things, the better it started to sound. And it got me really curious about, what is that driver really doing? What is the purpose of that driver? So in the design of the Unity, this all led to the Unity of like, how can I make this the simplest possible scenario that sounds as good or better than customs?
Right.
And the fewer drivers gave me more room to work with within the shell, gave me way more options. It enabled us to eliminate tubes and eliminate damper because we had more physical space. It enabled us to continue with what I had called the octave tech, the open canal tuned acoustic volume thing that I've been doing on customs for years. Enabled us to do that. So the driver count scenario ended for me a long time ago.
Yeah.
And, it serves its purpose in some scenarios to, give you more headroom if your drivers are quiet. But what I found with getting rid of tubes and dampers, that the acoustic impedance was so low, was essentially zero. There was no acoustic impedance anymore, that they were so loud, I didn't need the headroom.
Right.
I didn't need to double up drivers to create headroom. They were too loud. In fact, we had to we had to dial them back because they were
down. Yep.
And really, we say quad driver, but it's two drivers. They're both dual drivers. If they were both single drivers, I would have used them.
Yep.
That they don't even have them in a single version.
Oh, part of me wishes we could have achieved the sound of the Unity IEM with one driver just to make a point.
Yeah.
That driver count does not matter.
Yeah.
And now I'm curious. So when you were talking to your friend at Sony and he told you that this tweeter is the best sounding tweeter, what does that mean? What did that mean to him, and what does that mean to you? The best sounding tweeter.
The best sounding tweeter has a sonic character to it, and I've used Knowles a lot in the past, and we're probably going to use Knowles again. They're great drivers. Knowles has a very different character, to the TWFK and the SWFK. They have a real character. And those drivers I used a lot, and they're fantastic. But for me, I found them sonically a little bit bright, a little bit too sort of poignant, a little too
right.
And still good. They're great drivers, but it was just what I was envisioning, and this driver that I started to use from Sony it had this warmth and this smoothness, and it was really, you could kind of use it in all these scenarios. You could use it really up close to the canal. You could kind of pull it back. It had what I used to do in the producer, because it had three, it had the negative, and then you could go to the center pin and get half the gain. So we're not doing that anymore. I can give away that secret. I use both.
Right.
I don't know why. It was intuitive, but when I heard it, and any engineer go, why would you do, that's not how the driver, but to me it sounded even better.
Okay.
It created this thing. I don't know why.
I like this because to me it speaks to another interesting part of designing IEMs, and that is, so you use the word character when you describe what you experienced hearing this tweeter. I liked the character of it. So that tells me that not all frequencies are created equal, and that how would I phrase this? That maybe, for instance, that the graph doesn't tell you everything you need to know about what you're going to experience. Yeah. Just throwing it on a graph and seeing what frequencies it's throwing, okay, that's a little bit of information, and maybe there's some usefulness there. But one of the things that the graph isn't going to tell you is the character of the sound that you're about to hear. What does character of sound mean? To me, it means that a high end can actually have what I describe as grippiness, where it jumps off the page and it grabs you, and that it gives this realness and texture to the sounds that it's recreating, as opposed to just creating a sound that almost looks like you're looking at a picture on the wall, as opposed to living in the setting that's in the picture. Yeah. And so how much does a graph actually tell us, and what does character of sound mean to you?
That's a great question. The whole graphing scenario, obviously, I'll say me, because I spend the vast majority of my time designing IEMs. that obviously I use graphs all the time. I use graphs all the time. I have 5, 6 different measuring scenarios that I go, what's it look like here? What's it look like with a cheap Mic W test microphone? What's it look like with a 711 coupler from China? What's it look like with the Audix TM2? What's it look like with the Earthworks microphone?
Yeah.
I use graphs to catch. It's a strange thing. I don't have to anymore, but throughout the years, I've had to use testing to catch comb filtering, to catch, funny things that are happening that might not necessarily hear, especially in the early days when I wouldn't notice, a comb filtering, where you get this really tight, like super V shape, like something's happening, something's wrong.
Yep.
Graph would always catch that for me. I don't have that problem anymore because I can hear it now.
Sure.
I'm like, yeah, it's there. I've never, and we, I speak of the 10 years before, we're partners now, but I've never really posted graphs, and we continue to that now. Not because we don't have graphs, we have pro graphs. You got them on you know what they are. Yep. We sent them to California to have all the proper graphs, and I share them, but I don't post them because it's all, and most people know a graph really tells you how much of every frequency is present at a given instant.
Right.
That's all it says, but music doesn't present itself at all frequencies at every given, like all on the same. We're not putting pink noise through our monitors.
Yeah.
We're putting music through our monitors. And we put music through our monitors. There's dips and valleys all over the place.
Yeah.
So putting all frequencies all through at the same time gives us a linear evaluation of how much frequency is present at any one point.
Mm-hmm.
Doesn't tell us anything about character, what they sound like, what they
the sound stage.
Nothing. It tells us nothing about that. So to post a graph and then people to buy based on a graph, I think is not a good decision.
You're just not getting the whole story.
You're not even getting the part of the story.
Right.
Really.
Yeah.
The only thing if it's super obvious and you got 30 dB of bass gain,
sure,
then you're going to be like, these are going to be super hot in the bass, and they're going to, from my experience, you do that you're going to miss all the mids and the highs. It's just going to be enveloped in this mush of bass. So that, the easy stuff. But I've been really excited about graphs before. And I won't tell you the models, but there are a couple of models that I saw the graph and went, these are going to sound good. Like, that's a graph.
Mm-hmm.
And I had a client bring them in. We let them 30 seconds. I'm like, what? What? This doesn't work. It's not a thing. So yeah, this whole graph scenario, looking at a graph and buying based on a graph, or it offers very little information, and I liken it to life. If we look at life as a linear thing from this to there, with no ups and downs and backs and forth, that's not how life works. It's not linear.
Yeah.
It's not linear. Everything's happening at the same time. So in that, exploring character of drivers, and if you go through our driver collection, we have everything under the sun to try. Everything under the sun. Some terrible, some beautiful, some, they all have different character. And then it's a matter of how you put them together.
Yeah.
It's like, what does this offer? What does this offer? And how do I see them working together? And then you try, and 10 times out of 10, I give them to you, and yeah, it doesn't really work together, or yeah, this is happening. So character to me starts to derive from my career as a musician,
Right.
and being an upright bass player and struggling with the upright bass and trying to, play the upright bass on a big stage and it sounding terrible.
Sure.
Like, how do I have the character here, how do I present it in a bigger way? And learning, how to constantly fidgeting with EQ. Like, what if I make it a little brighter than I really like? What does it do out front? What if I bring in 900 was my worst? 900, I just lose my mind. I'm like, oh God. And so it was always all 900 off every time. And then I eventually was like, turn 900 up just till I could barely stand it. And then it cut.
Yeah.
So in designing monitors, it's like, how much of that can I take? Oh, and then pulling it back. And it's not as easy as an EQ. It's like a whole thing. But when I know that the character is there, and this is so silly, I have so many videos of this. When I design something, I put them in my ears and I play a tune that I've played 1,000 times, but the hair on the back of my neck stands out and my skin is like doing its goosebumps, and I'm immediately in tears, and I'm like dancing around the room, around the ping pong table, and I'm filming myself, crying and laughing from just listening to it, as silly as Coldplay, Up and Up.
Sure.
And I'm like, what is this? Why am I in tears? Why am I like, and it's that character that bites you.
Yeah.
And if it doesn't do that, I'm not onto it yet. So that character is a really intuitive sort of thing. We're all subjective to it. But what I have noticed is when that happens, we're onto something.
Yeah.
And I'm immediately like, Justin, come, you got to listen. And you come and you're like, there it is. I don't know how you did it, but there. So there is, it's subjective, but there is a character in sound that the vast majority of us can really relate to.
Absolutely. Well, it looks a little bit different for me. I mean, I tend to be a pretty stoic person, but if you know that we've found the sound, that we've found it by dancing around the room and having that response, the emotion, everything. For me, what that looks like is putting them in, listening to, again, a song I've heard 1,000 times, and really feeling like I'm actually in the room with the artist. That's the character that matters to me. Whether it's hearing the nature of the guitar and the strings on the guitar and just little characters of it that just feel so real, like the guitar is right in front of me, or hearing the space that the artist is singing in. Yeah. Not just hearing the microphone, but getting that little touch of the room that they're in, or hearing a delay where you can actually hear the delay going off into the distance. Yes. Where maybe you've never even noticed there was a delay on the voice, and now you actually hear the throw just, diffusing off into space. It's those things that make me feel like I'm in the studio where they created it, and I can actually get the imagery like I'm there. That's how I know that you found it.
Yeah.
And what that is an experience. Yeah. I mean, we're trying to create an experience. We're not trying to create a graph.
Yeah.
And we're not trying to play some sort of marketing game where it's like, this sounds great, but there's only 4 drivers. Like, we got to double that or else no one's going to care. It doesn't matter. When that experience has been created, graph be damned, driver count be damned.
Yeah.
That's what it's all about.
Yeah.
And I find on stage that experience really translates because it brings that realness that you experience in recorded music and starts to recreate it in live music. And so even for my own self, when I'm playing bass guitar on stage, I'm hearing all the character of my own hands because it is recreating the realness. And there can actually be a danger in recreating realness at times. And there's some tricks to creating a great monitor mix on stage, and we can talk about that too.
Yeah, I'd love to.
But I think when we've dialed in that experience, when we're listening to a Coldplay tune, there's something about that actually really translates into the world that I take this product out into, and the stages I take it out into, and it creates that same level of realness and experience in that setting, whether it be the feedback I'm getting from the audience, the feedback I'm getting from my own hands, what I'm experiencing from the band around me, and even just the character and the nature of the room.
Yeah.
That all is amplified and becomes part of the experience that we tried to capture by making a Coldplay song sound that good and feel that good.
Yeah. So is there or maybe you could tell us, tell me a little bit more of that. I wear monitors in the studio when I'm working on music, but the full honesty, I've never worn in-ear monitors on stage. Mm-hmm. I'm a jazz upright bass, but it's not necessary. So, but I do get a lot of, I use them all the time in the studio. It's just not on stage. So, are there some sort of simplified strategies for getting a great in-ear monitor mix on stage for say, people that are putting them in their ears for the first time, and like the in-ears are it's your last bastion. So it's like the end result. So if you don't know what to ask for, you don't know, there's vast majority of musicians don't really know how to mix. Yeah. They're artists. They're on stage singing. Like,
absolutely.
I don't know what frequency to ask for. I don't know how to pan stuff. We're not all engineers. So are there some simple things, say a guy just gets their in-ears. They've never worn them before. They put them in their ears. What's your strategy?
Yeah.
How do you create the sound?
If you want that natural listening experience, first of all, with the drums, mix from the overheads in, not the close mics out.
That's great.
The overheads are the best representation of what your real ears will hear in that space.
Yeah.
So turn your overheads up so that you get a real good overall sense of the kit and the room and the space around the kit.
Yeah.
And then add the close mics to taste to kind of round out the pointedness and the immediacy that you are going to need. You can't just have your close mics off. You're going to want some of that.
Yeah.
But start with the overheads. And actually, you could take that one step further. Start with the vocal mics and then do the overheads. Because the vocal mics are actually going to be the best representation of the entirety of the room.
Yeah.
And the space that you're in. And you can get all your close mics in the room and all your DIs and everything and all the amp mics or your amp modelers, all that stuff perfect. And then once you add vocals and overheads, it can absolutely destroy your mix. Because one of the most dangerous things to add to the mix afterwards is the space and is the room. But if you start with getting the space right and then add all that immediate information like your DIs and your microphones and everything like that, you add that later to taste and to get things to cut through a little bit more.
Yeah.
Then you've created a natural experience in your in-ears. Then you've created that sense of space, that openness, that three-dimensionality in the room that you're in. You get the character of the room. You get the feedback from the audience without even having proper audience mics. Now that's kind of your next level.
Yeah.
It's a bit of a luxury. There's not a lot of artists that actually travel with audience mics that face out towards the people where you can really get the audience experience. But even without that, just starting with the mics that are picking up the space. So your vocal mics and your overheads.
Yeah.
That is the best way to get perspective on the room, to add width and dimension to your mix, and then add your close mics to taste.
Yeah.
That's probably the most important tip, and one of the most important things I've ever learned about building a natural experience in my IEMs.
Does that help eliminate the this is the feedback I get, is this constant thing of the turn it up, just going with gain. Does that help resolve it? Like if you get start with the kick drum and it's nice big and full, then you're like everything thereafter you're trying to get, turn it up because the kick drum's
right
too big and full. Does it help with that?
While creating space can certainly help you turn everything up and have everything stay in its own lane and not just stacking on top of itself.
Yeah.
First of all, I hope that everybody has a chance to experience a stereo in your mix over just a mono in your mix, because that's kind of, panning is as powerful a tool as volume, sometimes more. Sometimes if you want more of something because you're not hearing it enough, try panning it elsewhere and creating a different lane for it, and suddenly you have all the clarity and it has its own space, and you actually don't need to turn it up. You can hear it as well as you were hoping to hear it just by moving it to a different position in your stereo image. So, and that's one of the things you can try. Another thing is, for me as a bass player on stage, I actually find volume is the most powerful tool. Overall mix volume is the most powerful tool to get my level right with where I'm sitting and how the bass feels and sounds to me. The first thing I'll try, if I don't hear myself enough, is not ask for more bass, but I'll turn my overall volume up a couple notches, because volume doesn't affect everything the same. It tilts things. And that's another thing we can talk about. And so what you're going to tilt the most with volume is the low end. And then secondary to that is the extreme high end. But the really low information is the first thing that to kind of go up like this relative to everything else as you add volume. And so I actually often find that if I'm not hearing myself clearly enough, I just turn up my pack. And that's the change I need. And then I haven't turned anything else up, and I haven't saturated my mix. I've just turned the overall volume up, and there's the clarity I was hoping to get out of my bass guitar. The last thing that I really recommend people do is get slightly more aggressive with your high pass filters across the board than maybe you're even comfortable doing. Right out of the gate, I will actually put a high pass filter anywhere from it depends on the room, but anywhere from 55 to 75 hertz. Cut it out aggressively. Now you might think that's all your low end. That must be a horrible experience. But it's funny how the brain kind of fills in the gaps. It doesn't feel like I don't have low end in the kick or in the bass. But what I do know is that there's a lot of fatiguing and saturating information that has been cut out. And it has created immense clarity across the board. I know most audio engineers, monitor techs, will innately put high-pass filters essentially on almost everything anyways. But just as that last line of defense, on my send from the monitor console to my ears, the overall stereo send, I will also, just as a safeguard, put an aggressive high-pass filter on that to add that extra layer of clarity to the entirety of the mix, to make sure that nothing is just lingering and slow moving frequencies aren't just kind of hanging out and saturating my overall mix. And that allows me to keep things like my own self quieter, because I'm not muddying things up. I'm not taking up all the space. I get all this clarity and natural high end and stringiness and all that good stuff from my bass guitar that helps me cut through. And I find myself not missing low end. I mean, there's times where I'll actually look around when I'm on stage and forget that I'm on in-ears. The sense of direction and space and three-dimensionality that I'm getting is so real and so organic that it eliminates that sense of isolation that I know a lot of people are worried about with IEMs, where they feel like they're going to be disconnected from everybody. They feel like they can't experience the room that they're in. And so I know a lot of companies have tried to address that with something, and a lot of people are hoping to address it with by using venting in their IEMs. And there's no shortage of in-ear monitors out there that you have little open air vents that is supposed to be a solution to help create that sense of room and space and eliminate that isolation. And I know when I first bought before I joined the company, my first set of in-ear monitors from Plunge Audio had like the high-end built-in microphone system so that I could let in some of the room.
Yeah.
And it had this fancy little remote control where I could turn the mic up and down and get different sonic characters out of the mic and everything. But for me personally, I found that to be not super useful. And I know a lot of people that you built that for, they ended up coming back going, I'm not sure this works for me. And what I found was that a microphone isn't going to, like one single tiny microphone built into an IEM is not going to create a very authentic sense of what's happening around you. For me, what I found it was doing was grabbing something in the space around me involuntarily. I didn't decide what it wanted to latch onto. It decided what it wanted to latch onto. And next thing you know, that microphone is grabbing a cymbal or grabbing a screaming person in the crowd or whatever it decided. And now that's what it was just really blasting and amplifying in the space. And so there was this lack of balance and authenticity that I was getting from that. But from what I understand, there's still, options out there where the solution to that isolating effect is a microphone. And in a lot of cases is venting. So I'm curious, like, have you experimented with venting in the products? Like, since I joined the company, we haven't.
Yeah.
But if I recall correctly, you did experiment with venting, and I'm curious what your experience was with that and if you found it to be helpful.
Yeah, in the first couple of years of Plunge Audio, I was working with etymologic research, and the product is still there. They've been sold to Lucid, but it was essentially a hearing protection, very simplified hearing aid, and it was meant to be electronic hearing protection. And I developed a really good friendship with Mead Killian there, and so I started to. I used to buy their hearing protection, and I'd pull the circuit out and pull this universal fit thing, and I'd pull them apart, and I'd take the circuit out, and then I'd build the circuit into my monitors. And at the time, this is 2011, 12, when IEMs were like really, it's like everybody was. You have to go IEM. So I just about every pair I saw were all these like with these ambient mic things, and I called them dynamic because it would, you could move around and things would change. You didn't have this static monitor mix. And that's what everybody wanted. And etymologic research was nice enough to actually sell me the circuits without the body. And so I did it for a long time and people loved it. But what I found was that after 3 months, 6 months, 8 months, that they would come back and go, I don't use it anymore. And I'm like, well, it's a really expensive thing to add to not use anymore after 6 months. So I eventually came to the realization, I started to tell people it was training wheels. There are training wheels for in-ear monitors.
Right.
They're to alleviate that, like, oh no, I feel isolated. I don't feel like I'm part of it.
Yeah.
You get used to it, and then you're like, I don't need this.
Right.
So I stopped. There's a whole backstory we can get to in why I kind of had to stop. At the moment, but I did stop doing that. But it was really essentially because they were training wheels for in-ear monitors. Then, I did a lot of venting the old tube to the faceplate and dampen it, and with really not much. A lot of the companies we were doing that back then, and it really wasn't a great solution. Still isn't a great solution, in my opinion. So what I found and what you sort of led to was this whole chat about, pressure buildup and fatigue. And in designing the unities, and you talking about high passing from 75 low, essentially 75.
Yeah.
Well, so what happens in the design of in-ear monitors, and why the unities, if you look at the graph of the unities, that it flows pretty flat right down to 5. It might even dip off as it comes, below 20 hertz. And that's intentful. There's a reason why we did that. For that very reason, because musicians are wearing their in-ear monitors. Sometimes they're wearing them 8 hours a day in the studio, but you're wearing them on a 4-hour gig. You're wearing them a lot, and every night after night after night. So with an in-ear monitor that has, you can look everywhere. The vast majority of in-ear monitors have a big buildup of 80 hertz and below, because they want that sub bass. They think that makes him sound massive and big, and in an essence it does for 20 seconds,
right?
Until your voice kicks in, and you're like, why doesn't it? I can't hear it. It's because there's too much sub bass in there. So what happens with that sub bass, with properly sealing monitors, that pressure from 50 hertz and below builds up in the ear canal, which is because it can't escape.
Yep.
You get these really lengthy waves that are building up in the ear canal, and it's fatiguing, and it builds up pressure, and it's bad for the ear.
Right.
It's bad for the ear. So in the design of the Unity was, and just to go back, because I've repaired just about any other in-ear monitor company that's out there.
Yep.
I've had them all come to me for repair, and I'm like, why is it when I go to 82 dB, put them on the test, it's like all bass and the highs are like all like this? Like, why is that? And then I turn it up to 96, and all of a sudden the highs would come up to match the bass response. So you had to pin it to get clarity.
Right.
But you still have all this bass response. So what I found was, like, so many people were complaining about fatigue in these other models and stuff. I'm like, why? Like, why is nobody complaining about fatigue in Plunge audio? It's because in my design, it's designed to have all frequencies and the clarity at 82, 83 dB.
Interesting.
Not at 96. So now with the Unities coming out and everybody talking, like, why? My fatigue is gone. I'm like, yeah, because now you can listen to it at 82, 83 dB. You're not getting the pressure buildup. It's just not there anymore.
And is that one of the things that venting was designed to help alleviate, was pressure buildup?
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah, that's essentially, really, in other words, that's what it's there for. It's no longer really there for an ambient thing. It's for that pressure buildup. And in my opinion, if I can be harsh, it's a poorly designed monitor. If you have all that sub bass response and you have to turn it up to 96 dB to get clarity, it's in design that's not a great scenario.
Right.
So when you design something like that and then you add a valve or a mechanism to release the pressure, in my opinion, you're putting a Band-Aid on the scenario.
Right.
Design the in-ears properly. Design them without that. And because from your professional experience on stage, you're bypassing it anyway.
Yeah.
And you're bypassing unities that, you're even going further with it. So it in my opinion, it's better to have something that's designed sort of flat through the lows at 82, 83 dB, where the clarity's there. We don't need to turn them up to get that clarity.
Now, I think one of the dangers in that, from a company perspective, is that the out-of-the-box sound or sonic experience for a listener is, for all intents and purposes, not going to be quite as exciting when you've designed it to be a little more flat in that range.
Yeah.
And so we're trying to create something that's like the ultimate in utility and experience, knowing kind of what you're going to put these things through on stage. But when you put on your favorite song to hear them out of the box, they might not hit as hard in the low end. And you might be thinking, well, these don't have low end. And to me, that's an interesting topic as well, because I think there's a big difference between your out-of-the-box sound, the kind of sonic experience, and how it all translates on stage.
Yeah.
Because, the drivers that are inside the Unity, they can get low, they can throw anything that you want to pump through them when you're actually EQing your monitor mix. However, we've created an out-of-the-box experience very intentionally that is, A, not going to lead to pressure buildup, but B, is going to be usable kind of for anybody that puts them in very easily and very quickly. Again, maximizing the utility side of things at the risk of people listening to them and going, wow, these don't have as much sub as this model, therefore they're not as good. In my experience, the most dangerous game you can play is the sub game.
Yeah.
Trying to captivate people in the first 10 seconds of listening with as much sub as possible, only to have that bite them in the end.
Yeah.
Or to have it absolutely wiped and high passed out of their mix anyways, so that these things become usable. But now you've paid all this money for that extra sub information that not only is creating extra pressure buildup, but is maybe forcing an ambient vent, which messes with your overall IEM, your ability to dial in a perfect IEM mix. And it's really added no long-term value to what you have with your IEMs. When we're R&Ding and I'm listening to all these models that are being created, one of the first things I'm looking for is, are the sub-frequencies balanced?
Yeah.
Not are they kicking my ass? It's, are they balanced? And also, like, I want to experience them. Don't get me wrong.
Yeah.
It's fun. However, if it's hijacking the mix or if it's fatiguing my ear, these just aren't usable.
Yeah.
That's not something I know I can take on stage and get kind of maximum experience out of, because that stuff's just going to hijack my mix anyways. It's going to tire my ear. And I'm going to have to cut it out. And one thing that I think is worth getting honest about is the fact that at the end of the day, in a sense, and again, I'm curious your opinion on this, does it matter which IEMs you're buying? Because in a sense, aren't we all just going to carve them up at the monitor desk to make them sound exactly the way we want them to sound anyways?
There's a musician world on stage, and there's a listener. There's an audiophile world.
Yeah.
Where it largely we are in-ear monitors for musicians. Largely, we're expanding into the audiophile world. They're starting to get their ears on them. Go, hey, what's going on here? And so in the world of audiophile, it's they're not massaging them
right
as much. They're massaging them with tips,
yes,
cables, players. They're massaging them that way, but they're not sort of like, okay, we're taking this and now we're trying to make it work. They're like,
right,
this sounds great. How do I make it bigger, make it more spectacular with, nicer players, converters and all that stuff.
Yeah.
Whereas in the musician world, we're like, okay, this is what we got. Now I'm going to massage it to make it sound how I need to sound. No. There's also sonic maturity.
Sure.
Some people, and it's not necessarily a new artist. It might be a seasoned veteran artist that they just play guitar and sing. It doesn't matter what's in their ears.
Sure.
So they're not going to massage it. They're just going to go, it works.
Right.
Right? I wish I was like that. Would take a whole lot of pressure off to not have to just give me the PV amp and let's go. I can't. I'm like, no, there's this and this. I need my AER. I need my, I got to massage it to make it So I'm like, there's my sound on stage. I've spent
Right.
35 years trying to get a sound on the upright bass.
Yeah.
I'm not going to plug it into a PV amp. Doesn't, no offense,
Hey.
PV. It's not going to work. I'm not going to play. I can't play music that way. So it will really, as long as an in-ear monitor offers you sort of this basic, enough headroom, enough, headroom in the sub that you can push it a little bit without distortion, enough of a crossover in the tweeter where if you start pushing bass, you're not pushing some bass into the tweeter to get
Right.
just, as long as it offers those basic functions of that stuff. Yeah, the difference between $1,000 monitor and a $5,000 monitor for a musician on stage, we're essentially going to massage it to where we want it anyway.
But there are a couple things that you can't carve to your liking. One, because there's no button for this on any monitor console in the world, is soundstage.
Yeah.
That is something that is inherent to the monitor, and you can't fake that. There's not a plug-in on your X32 that's going to create that sense of space and openness and three-dimensionality where you can place something way over here and something else way down there and really get that expansive experience.
Yeah.
And then the other thing that you can't just dial in after the fact is how it fits.
Yeah.
And to me, putting a set of in-ears in your ears and going, you know what, these don't have enough of this frequency, I don't like these. Well, there are ways to add that frequency. There are ways to subtract this frequency. There's ways to carve it up so that you can really make it at least close to what you're really hoping out of your IEMs. What I'm listening for when we're R&Ding and what I'm searching for, one, soundstage, three-dimensionality. Is that there? If so, that's going to enable me on stage to really create exactly what I want to hear, create lanes for everything, create that sense of natural openness while on stage, but also, and something we worked really, really, really hard on, is a perfect fit.
Yeah.
Now that is something that is underrated, wildly underrated. I would venture to say that fit is more important than sound. How they fit is more important than how they sound. Well, first of all, if they don't fit properly, it almost doesn't matter how they sound.
Yeah.
Because the way the frequencies are going to be bleeding out of your ears anyways, and the way the room and the ambient sound is going to be bleeding into your ears, you'll never be able to get a IEM mix that you're satisfied with anyways if they don't fit properly.
Yeah.
Not to mention,
100%.
are they comfortable? Can you wear these things for a 3-hour set and not actually be in pain? Or just have a sweaty, itchy mess going on in your ears that takes you out of the moment. And fit is an issue that when I joined the company and started working with you in 2018, something that you slaved over with every set of impressions that came in when we were making custom IEMs, to really, in your vast knowledge and experience and training, take a look at a set of impressions and go, okay, here's some tweaks that I think need to be made to ensure that these things fit as best they possibly can with the impressions that I've been given.
Yeah.
I'm curious how often you got maybe what I'll just call a perfect impression from somebody, and also what can go wrong when you're getting your impressions done that will essentially keep you from ever having a perfect fitting IEM.
Yeah, that's great. That's a great question. Yeah, I've gotten great impressions, but largely because I was, I am not an audiologist. I am not trained, but I did work in a hearing aid clinic for 6 years with audiologists that, I learned a lot. I learned how to take impressions. I learned how to do hearing tests. I learned how to take hearing aids apart. I learned all that stuff. So I started taking impressions, so I could get exactly what I wanted. I knew. So, however, when a client wasn't local and they I had audiologists that I worked with that got great impressions too, but it was somebody I didn't know. I'd get impressions and they would look good. We're like, okay, we got second bend, we got the full helix, we're looking good. And then I would design them and I'd, send them out and the client would try them on and go, they don't seal. And to be fair, 90% of the time it was the helix was sticking out.
Right.
And you're like, use the helix in, send me a picture of the helix is sticking out, get the helix in, where usually problem resolved. But fit is everything. And, I took the better part of, I'm probably exaggerating, but probably 10,000 sets of impressions. I had boxes and boxes and boxes of impressions that I took.
Yeah.
And 3D, just, scan them, design them on the computer, ship them out. Oh, this doesn't work. The helix is too big. It's comfortable. There's a little thing in the canal. I shaved it off, but not quite enough. Rebuild, just rebuild after rebuild. And I was pretty good. I was pretty quick at, rebuilding and getting guys on the road, but the whole custom scenario and to be fair to manufacturers, when somebody gets them, it's a lot of work to build a pair of custom monitors.
Absolutely.
And they get sent back and you got to rebuild them. It's a lot of work. Mm-hmm. And it's a lot of wait time.
Yep.
And us sort of being the only sort of custom in-ear monitor in Canada, anybody else is going to the US and customs and duty and waiting. It was a wee bit of a nightmare.
Yeah.
To do it. And to be fair to manufacturers who at the time were offering 30-day fit guarantee. Like 30 days? There's no way anybody's going to know they fit and get them back to you within 30 days.
Right.
And I understand from manufacturers, like, we can't just keep rebuilding them.
Yeah.
And I know for me, I just kept rebuilding them. I'm like, screw that 30 day, but it catches up. It catches up to you, or I'm like, this is too much. I can't. 3 years later, I can't. It's hard to build another pair of customs. So you start to it sort of impounds on the manufacturer if they're really trying to offer that level of customer service, which led to, there's got to be a better solution.
Absolutely.
For everybody.
I mean, only a portion of this can even be pegged on the manufacturer because they're working with the impressions that are being sent to them.
Yeah.
They didn't take those impressions.
Yeah.
And when those impressions were done, does your audiologist have a lot of experience doing impressions, not just for hearing aids, but for musician IEMs? That's a totally different ballgame. You need different things. Was the auto block put in correctly? How much tension was on your jaw? Have you gone swimming recently? Have you changed medication recently? Have you gained a bunch of weight or lost a bunch of weight recently? Have you been on an airplane recently? How are your general inflammation levels? All of these things play into whether your impressions turn out perfectly or not.
Exactly.
So if you have a perfect impression that when they build an IEM out of that, it's going to just fit in perfectly, like you've won the lottery.
Yeah.
But then one of the things that people don't think about is that, let's say you get that perfect fitting set of IEMs. You're one of the lucky ones. Well, the countdown's on because our ears are always changing. They never stop changing. From the day you're born to the day you die, your ears are always changing. And so have fun with your perfect fitting IEMs until they don't fit perfectly anymore.
Yeah.
And then what?
Then you get a new pair of IEMs.
And hope that the next time around they fit as perfectly as they did the first time.
Yeah.
Maybe you don't get so lucky the second time. So now you've got this countdown on, and after a few years' time, and that can be accelerated by all sorts of the factors that we already talked about.
Yeah.
Now they don't even fit anymore, and now you're stuck. And so that's always been one of the built-in downsides to customs. And one of the built-in upsides to universals is that if you can get a perfect fitting universal, they can theoretically fit perfectly forever because you can just change the tip on the end as your ears change, and you can change them with your ears.
Yeah.
The problem has been a perfect fitting universal IEM has been a myth
Yeah.
up to this point. Nobody loves how universal IEMs fit. And so I'm curious, in your words as the designer, what you applied to these and what you did differently and how you got to the place where you've created a universal in-ear monitor that actually fits as well as a perfect fitting custom IEM.
Yeah. No, that's a great question. And that was probably the hardest part of this whole scenario, was that the basic anatomy of the ear is the canal goes in, back, and up. In design, I knew that that's what I needed to do, and I'd gone through this process of looking through impressions, all 3D scan and everything.
Yeah.
Like, okay, I had this big ambition. Let's take 10,000 sets of impressions and then combine them all together and take the best one of the thing. Like everybody else was touting, it's like 50,000 sets of impressions, and we made it like, and then you see the result and you're like, but the canal goes down, out, and forward. No, you didn't. Anyway, that was an ambition. I did not do that.
Right.
Essentially, what I realized was that people always ask me, how do you know how they sound before you sent them to me? I'm like, because I listened to them. They're like, well, how do you listen to
These are their customs?
Customs.
Okay, yeah.
How did you know? I'm like, because I put them in my ears and listened to them. Well, they're custom. How did you? I'm like, I've never once in my lifetime had a pair of in-ears that I built that I couldn't get into my ears and seal and listen to them. And it was kind of like, yeah, you're a pretty ordinary dude, Simon. You're pretty ordinary ears. Everything seems to fit. Yeah. Some of the small canals have to wiggle around to get them to fit. So I kind of realized, well, maybe I just take my impression. I can make everything fit. So I honest to God, I took my left ear impression. This is my left ear impression.
I love it.
And it's all designed around, obviously it's changed and it's manipulated and everything, but it's the general shape of my left ear. And you were on board this. We went through easily 40 prototypes.
Yep.
Different shapes and trying to leave a helix in. And, the helix is this part up here, trying to leave it in so we get that thing. I'm like, it's painful. That's not going to fit everybody. Different shapes. I mean, we had ambitions of like removable helixes. And remember we had crazy stuff.
Through all the ideas. Right?
All the ideas, everything. And we really struggled with trying to take what we had with customs into a universal fit thing.
Yeah.
It wasn't, we tried the producer model that everybody loved, put it in, like, it's not there.
Yeah.
Why is it? It's just not there. It took a lot to figure out how to design universals. It was a different situation. So that fit thing is we ran into, when we finally settled on the shape and everything, we're like, yeah, this, like, we can actually wear those. I was seeing out of wood.
Yep.
And that was the only way to make them. And then we're like, okay, it's taken a week to machine a pair of universals. This is going to work. We can't offer a $3,500 universal. It needs to come down where it makes sense. And when we started investigating how we're going to make these, I quickly ran into and this is just my realization. I don't know if this is true, but what we ran into was when I sent the shell off to when we tried injection molding, and they're like, we can't do it.
Yeah.
You can't injection mold this with having these organic shapes that are like curving and twisting, and then you got the end of the nozzle that has a ledge on it. Like it was impossible to injection mold it, even with all the. It's like, no. oh. And then we went to CNC machining. Well, can we have them machined faster? Well, yeah, we can machine them, but it's going to be $600 US for 2 shells. We're like, nope, that's not going to work. So we kind of quickly came to the realization that there's a reason why, and again, I could be full of shit, but there's a reason why manufacturers went without down and forward.
Yeah.
Because now you could have the inner mold of the injection pull out. It wasn't messed up. So I'm like, oh, that's perhaps why they did that. I don't know. Quickly led us down the path of like, what are we going to do? You know, and, you know, during COVID, we had, you know, I'm just constantly looking at things and ways, you know, trying to figure out how to build things. And I remember, because we had just joined forces, like, there's this printer I want to get. It's like $250,000. And, you know, we're right in the heart of COVID and nobody's on the road, nobody's ordering. And it's like, oh, think of the things we could do with this printer. And we're like, we're just not there yet, man. We're just not there yet. And so I'm laying awake in the middle of the night, like, this is my job. Figure out how we're going to make these things. And I was like, oh, that printer we looked at, maybe that can do it. I'm like Googling and searching in the middle of the night. I'm like, well, there's a company that has one of these printers. And I just reached out to them in the middle of the night. Like, can we do this? And he's like, yeah, send me the file. And I sent him the file. And he's like, yeah, we can print it exactly as it is. No problem. We can put 1,000 on. Like, yes. So that was like the diamond there, was like figuring out how to do this, and how to manufacture them. Not manufacture them, but have, you know, the shells and the faceplates. We still all are assembly here in house. And all of a sudden, the 10 years of like, there's not a universal fit out there that I can see a musician wearing on stage changed.
Yeah.
Like, now there's a universal fit that people can wear on stage, and to broach that, you know, talking about the openness and the imaging and all that stuff. I'm like, that all had to be there.
Yeah.
And in this design is, you know, when we started building the universals, we're kind of using the old school method of tubes and dampers and trying to get the thing. It never worked. It wasn't there. And in this final design, no tubes. So there's no tubes that are hardening over time. There's no tubes that are getting full of wax and getting plugged. And the second thing was no dampers. And that's not a unique thing, essentially. You know, lots of guys talk about not using dampers, but I am adamant, 100% no dampers.
Yeah.
And nothing against dampers. It was a way to create your crossover. There was no way of getting rid of the highs from the set.
Right.
You put a damper in to get rid of it. But what I saw was everybody using dampers on tweeters. I'm like, dampers on tweeters? What is that? Why are you doing that? So I always likened it to taking a snare. I don't know why, a snare drum. I'm like, take a great drum and you take a beautiful, 60s Ludwig snare drum, and you hit it with sticks and punch, and it's alive, and all the frequencies are flowing off, or all the overtone series and everything. It's alive. And then you get an engineer that's like you're recording the snare drum, and you're like, well, it's just like, it hits too hard in that frequency range. Or like, can we let's put a little like silk cloth over top of your snare drum. And then you hit the snare drum, and the graph of the snare drum is like, oh, okay, it's mellowed, it's nice and smooth now. And the drummer's like, what the fuck? Like, every time I hit my snare drum, it's just like, it's dull, it veiled. That's what a damper does. Yeah. To a driver. It veils it and makes it sound sort of cloudy and muddy. So what you're doing is taking this big wide open imaging, and you're like closing it down to take these peaks and valleys to make them smoother. But who said it? It's smooth. It doesn't exist in our life. It doesn't exist in this room right now, this smooth frequency. Who says that's a good thing?
Right.
I want it dynamic. I want it like ready to go. And I always likened it to, and I've never been to a horse race, but I likened to it like a thoroughbred horse with the jockey on it, ready to go, and the gates closed. And the horse is just like, I can let me out, let me out, let me out. That's the kind of energy I want from in-ears. And that's the kind of energy I believe we captured in the unities.
Yeah.
Is like, let me go. I'm ready to go. There's nothing holding me back.
Yeah.
That anticipation of what could be. So, and a lot of that was getting rid of the dampers. But how do you get rid of a damper? How do you create the crossover without a damper?
Right.
Another day.
That'll be for next time, and I can't wait to get into that.
Yeah.
Yeah. So much awesome conversation, so enlightening. Love talking to you about this stuff.
Yeah, so great.
I can't wait to keep digging into more stuff with you, man.
Yeah, it's beautiful. Love this shit.